Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. And, Brandon, we've got a great guest tonight that we've been talking about with the listeners for a couple weeks now. Tyler Zombro, who is a relief pitcher for the Durham Bulls in the Tampa Bay Rays organization, is going to be joining us and talking a little bit about really his journey in baseball, but more specifically about the unfortunate and horrific incident that happened back in early June, where he was hit with a ball, batted ball, that came right back up the middle, every pitcher's nightmare, and hits him right in the head. And, Tyler's knocked out before he even hits the ground. And, he's going to share with us tonight about what his kind of memory of some of those events are, and then specifically, that journey back.
Yeah, I think it's a great show for the 50th show. So kind of a bit of a milestone there. Not to mention, just for our listeners, one of our co-hosts here is turning 50 by the time that this thing comes out. So, and it's not me. But I think what people are going to hear with Tyler is a young man who's mature beyond probably his age, absolutely a cerebral guy, and you'll hear about his approach and his background into some of the occupational therapy and physical therapy, and he had a really, really deep understanding of what happened to him once he kind of came to and all that. He really knew what it was going to take. And I think as a competitor, we hear from him how that helped shape his direction and his improvement. It's amazing for those that haven't seen it. It is an absolutely terrifying thing as a baseball player. Both as a spectator to watch that and also know not only what Tyler went through, but what the batter, the young boy or young man that hit it, must have kind of gone through or is going through. But man, John, Tyler is on pace to get back up on the bump next year, which is just absolutely incredible. It's incredible.
I mean, when you watch that video, and I thought that was such a great point you brought up in the interview, and the listeners will hear this, is about the person who hit the ball, because, and this, I mean, both of us played the game. Our good friend of the show, Chad Hefner, when I was in high school, actually hit a ball that shattered it was in a baseball game in high school that came right back off of a metal bat, back into the pitcher's face, never got his hands up, and shattered the kid's jaw and everything. And I mean, that sticks with you for a while as the person who hit it. And when you watch the video of Tyler, the hitter literally takes 2 steps out of the batter's box and just drops to his knees. Like he just is, he knows the magnitude of what just happened. And you can just tell. And granted, we all know that stuff happens. It's not anybody's fault, any of that stuff. But that's where all of a sudden the game is so irrelevant at that moment. And everybody realizes it in that blink of an eye.
For sure. And Tyler talks a little bit about perspective. I know that, we bring up perspective a lot. And it's something like that really kind of recenters or refocuses everybody to go, hey, we're playing a game, and as a fan, we put a lot into it. I even think as a parent, we feel like these games are, more important than they are and all that. And yes, they're important. And yes, you need to go out and compete and absolutely give everything you can to the process. But something like this, where you go, holy cow, like this is, this could be tragic. And we're blessed to have him on. I know there were a lot of people. I remember you kind of reaching out the night it happened, actually, and was like, hey, if you can, put a prayer up for Tyler and his family. And I remember seeing the video and just being it affected me.
It's a great way of, it's a great way. It was the words I was thinking, is it affects you. And I know, and other people I shared that video with, it affected them as well. And, we'd be remiss to not talk about, Tyler's family, his mom, Fonda, friends with my wife, and she was, my son's grade school teacher and is a principal of a elementary school back in the area that Tyler's from and that I just recently moved from. And you talk about that whole community just supports them. I mean, just unbelievable. The prayers, everybody that just rallied behind him right away, because they're just good people. They're the kind of people that you want to make sure that you're supporting. But it's amazing how, and Tyler talks about this a little bit too, is that the game of baseball, and for most of our listeners, I'm sure they've played at some level. And I know a lot of sports are like this, but Tyler even references this in the show, is that it's such a fraternity that, when something like this happens, sure. I mean, you're going to have so much support. Everybody understands that we're all just one pitch away all the time anyhow. And so, you really, I think, in given these situations, that's where you see the game, the athletes really kind of shine, because you see that fraternity and brotherhood.
For sure. And you rally around. I mean, he's already spoken to several players that have gone through it. I mean, it's a great interview, and I'm excited for the listeners to hear it.
Absolutely. So here's Tyler Zombro.
Happy birthday, brother.
Thank you, my man. Well, Brandon, we've really been looking forward to our next guest for a while now, since we found out he was going to be joining us, and it's one of those things. I kind of joke about the fact that you always get the question, what'd you do last summer? Or how was your summer? And, our next guest, Tyler Zombro, is definitely going to have a really interesting story to talk about what he did in the summer of 2021.
For sure. And especially knowing where he's going to be in 2022, I think you can look back and it becomes a story that should inspire some folks. I know it's an incredible story, and I'm happy that the listeners are going to get to hear from Tyler.
Absolutely. Well, Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
For sure. So I've known Tyler for quite some time. His mom was actually my son's third grade teacher. I keep having that question mark at the end of that statement, because I don't know it's third or fourth grade, but the reality of it is I used to live in the area that Tyler's from in Virginia. And so I had the pleasure of seeing Tyler kind of grow as a baseball player through, youth baseball into high school baseball, even watched him play some in the Valley League when he was a player at George Mason. We'll get into some of that. But Tyler, one of the things that always impressed me about you as a player and just watching you develop over the years was, even at a young age, you were somebody who always seemed like you had a plan when you came to the ballpark. You always were, as I like to say, one of those players that's very interested in being good. That means you're doing the work, you're willing to ask the right questions and what it's going to take and get around the right people. Where did that come from? Where did the whole desire and the kind of that maturity come from at that age?
I think at a young age, I realized that I wasn't genetically the most elite in the population. I think I knew that I had to use my mind to my power in terms of articulating a game plan, how I approach training. I had to be diligent with everything I did. I didn't think that I could waste ample amount of time and still be successful. Thankfully, with my grandfather on both sides, my dad being around the game of baseball, I knew that I needed to get embedded with the right people to guide me in the right direction. And I think when you ultimately kind of divvy up that time of development well, obviously you're more prone to success.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So before we get too far into this, I want to know, how are you doing? Just in general, how are you feeling? We'll get into all of the details here in a little bit, but where are you right now with your recovery? I guess is probably a good way to put it. Rehab, where are you in that?
I'm doing very well. I couldn't be more thankful for the team at Duke. So everything was super smooth there, from speech therapy to occupational therapy to the general PT side mixed in with the sports science. They have a concussion specialist there who was very helpful with various brain function things, eye tracking, whatever it might be. So all of that has progressed very well. Cognitive function is fully back. I'm starting to get into more of the physical side of things and continue to get better and better there. I'm actually starting to throw again. So that's where I'm at. And, as it lies right now, I'm trying to get myself physically ready for spring of 22.
Yeah. And, not to bury the lead here, but I do want to, and I'm glad to hear that you're making that kind of progress. And I've been pleased kind of getting those updates that I see online from people around you and even your own social media to see that kind of a progress. But I want to take you back a little bit before we get into exactly what happened in June, and what got you on this path to rehabilitation. Talk to us a little bit about your baseball journey, if you would. Just maybe from high school into college. I know you played baseball at George Mason, and then maybe talk to us a little bit about how you ended up with the Rays organization.
Yeah, so high school wasn't super highly recruited. Only major school I talked to was Wake Forest, Boston College. At that point, they were actually lower level in the ACC. William and Mary and George Mason were really my final two decisions. The blend of academics and baseball at Mason seemed like a great fit. From a player development standpoint at Mason, there's a lot of autonomy. You've seen a lot of good guys come out of there, get to the pro ranks. If you're self-driven, they have ample resources, just a matter of how you utilized it. So Mason was a phenomenal fit for me. Was able to transfer a lot of credits into there out of high school as well, which gave me more time for baseball. And then after George Mason, I went undrafted in 2017. Actually didn't hear anything that year in the draft at all. The previous year in 16, I had heard from a few teams. Nothing came about. So in 17, going undrafted was certainly shocking to me. I was a pre-PT, pre-med student. So in terms of what came next, I didn't know, actually. Was debating getting into coaching, going to PT school. Do I start working in the private sector? And I actually started working at a private baseball facility in the DC area. And then roughly a month post-draft, I believe it was July 1st or 2nd, got a call from the Rays asking if I would go down to Port Charlotte to fill in and kind of eat some innings in the GCL. So signed with them then and have been with them since.
It's awesome. And really worked. I mean, the reason I bring this up is because before we get into what happened back in June, I want people to have some kind of some context to the whole thing, that you were, had gone through Princeton, your time in Singaway. I mean, you'd work your way up to where you were now playing with the AAA Durham Bulls, and had been to big league training camp, right? I mean, you spring training, had an opportunity to be around some of those guys, which I think is going to be something we'll talk about a little bit later on as well. But then, so now what was kind of the thought process from you coming into this summer? Had the Rays talked to you about what their plans were for you as the summer would unfold?
No, they hadn't said much. in 2019, I was lucky enough to be named reliever of the year, had a really good season split between AA and AAA. Unfortunately, in 20, I was not in the alternate site. So I didn't play at all that year. I was in big league camp in 20 before the COVID outbreak started, and then invited back to big league camp in 21. Other than that, you know how deep the Rays are with their farm system. So at that point, like, you're just trying to get a job. There's a lot of shuffling with how we optimize the roster. So not a lot from them in terms of what kind of to expect, but at the same point in time, you always know with us and how we utilize matchups. If I am a guy who they can shuffle onto the 40-man roster and I fare well against the Yankees lineup, I might be there. It's somewhere you've always got to be on your toes, ready to bounce, be flexible. So that's just kind of the mindset I guess you always have to have with this organization.
So Tyler, if you can speak to that a little bit, because, as a baseball player, we've all got routines and we get kind of locked in, and there's certain things that we like to do. And some people would say it's superstitious or whatever, but to your point, each organization kind of has its own way of working the system and all that. How do you going into pro ball, were you a pretty flexible from a mental perspective? Like, were you a guy that kind of set expectations? Did you come in with no expectations? Like, how do you do that, and how do you manage it? Because you're so close. You're in Durham, you're in AAA, and you're right on the cusp of being there. So how do you handle that while also having to go out and perform, right? So you've got this thing kind of hanging over your head, but you've got to go perform.
Yeah. So I'll tell you right now, in college, I was as superstitious as they come. I was the Friday starter my sophomore, junior, and senior years, and I could tell you about every single thing I did Monday to Monday, every single week. I don't even know how much that varied across 3 years, to be honest with you. Going into pro ball as a free agent, I quickly found out I was going to be a reliever. I knew that I had to obviously adapt my training regimen, how I'm ready every day. And I think especially as you move up towards the AA level, and especially at AAA, when you have the chance to throw back-to-back outings, things of that nature, you certainly have to be way more flexible, understanding what your body needs. I think one thing from the mental side that's helped me a ton is the ability to check in and check out. Being a reliever, and again with the Rays, if you're a high leverage guy, you don't know if you're going in the 4th or the 9th, but being able to turn it off a bit and then turn it on when you need is something I've definitely learned. But your question about, the big leagues being there and kind of that overarching thing that is quote unquote looming over you, I quickly learned in my first year in Princeton, my first 3 outings were terrible. And I'm sitting there, and the GCL was fine. And, Princeton's not the best city in the world. And I'm sitting here in the Appalachian League, like, what's going on? I had similar thoughts when I got sent to extended spring training in 2018. It's like, can I get to the big leagues? What do I have to do to get there? Started pressing a ton, kind of living and dying on every outing. And honestly, I think my teammates, especially the Latin guys from the Dominican, Venezuela, Colombia, just ultimately offering points of reflection on where I'm at with life in general. For these guys, it is a little bit of all or nothing. In Princeton, I took a couple guys to the Dollar General, and they're buying soap for their family. And I'm sitting over here worrying about how I just did my last outing, and they're worrying about taking soap home for their family. I need to keep these things in perspective. And I think that ultimately has been the driving factor behind keeping me sane through this journey. Even though we all want to get to the big leagues, we do need to remember where we're at.
I love that answer so much, because as we talk to a lot of the sports psychologists and a lot of the mental performance guys we talk to on this show, one of the things they talk about is looking at things as an opportunity instead of nervousness, look at it as excitement, and kind of just reframing those thoughts. So I really like that idea of bringing that perspective into it. One thing that I think you have a unique kind of lens into is something that I have asked all of, Bob Tewksbury, Scott Foxhall, all of the guys that have been around the pitching game is I'm really curious about the difference between the mindset you had as a starter when it came to handling the adversity of a game, that you are, kind of you're creating your own trouble, right? Like if all of a sudden you get first and second, it was because you had some things happen during that inning. But then the mindset you have to have as a reliever, where you're inheriting this stress, right? You're inheriting somebody else's situation where now all of a sudden you're coming in at second and third. I mean, you don't always get to come in to that clean inning. So have you seen a difference, or did you have to make a conscious decision to say, okay, I have to change my mindset a little bit, getting on there as a starter versus being a reliever?
Definitely. I think, we talk about those nerves ultimately being the chance at opportunity. And one thing I quickly became good at is, when that phone rings in the bullpen, like go ahead and spike your heart rate. Like it's, you're going to get ready a little bit quicker. And ultimately, if there are inherited runners, you got to be ready to go from the first pitch. There's not a buffer window to kind of feel out the game flow. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I've had to learn over time. And as a reliever, generally you're simplifying your stuff down to 2 at a maximum 3 pitches. You're not reserving anything in the arsenal for the next time through the order. So having a clear approach mentally of your plan of attack, knowing you have to go from pitch 1, I think is definitely the best aspect from the relieving role. There's, again, with starting, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like you go first time through the order, you don't know how a hitter responds to a certain pitch. And, the second time through, now I'm reflecting heavily back on the sequence I threw in before. But relieving, there's none of that. You got to learn how to step on the gas pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I think it's just so fascinating to me, because when we talked to Scott Foxhall, he was saying that, some relievers have this mindset that those aren't my runs. Like they get on the hill and they're like, look, I'm going to compete. But having that mindset of those aren't my runs, not in a selfish way, but just so that you're not so ultra focused on the outcomes there. Like, it kind of in some ways said weirdly relaxes some relievers, but then you have some relievers that come in and right from the get-go, they're like, I don't care what happens. Those dudes aren't scoring. I don't care who's responsible for putting them there. They're not getting across the plate.
Yeah, I think an interesting thing that I've felt with that is the extra innings rule with the guy on second base now, right? Like that's not technically my run, but it's like if you sack bunt him and I've got 1 out, a guy on third, like I'm playing with house money to get a strikeout, right?
Yeah.
Like that guy's supposed to score.
Right.
I think eliminating the externals there are valuable. I do know personally for me, if I come into a game and the runner's on first and second, nobody out, if it's nowadays, most people aren't bunting, but I'm thinking, okay, what scenarios play out here to where those guys don't score? Is there a ground ball double play in line? A pop out, is this guy a strikeout candidate? As soon as that guy steps up to the plate, generally I know which outcome of those things I'm probably looking for. So that's kind of how I approach it, is almost like a puzzle of, all right, what's the way out?
Yeah, no, I can easily see you doing that. You were always one of those cerebral pitchers, and to your point earlier, I think, and this is not a knock on you, you said it yourself. I think when you're not that, naturally it's like everything just comes easy to your player. That's the ones who are sometimes the best players, because they're the camp junkies. They're the ones who do everything more fundamentally and strategically, right? They have to think a lot more strategic about some of those things. So I think that's probably one of those things, as you mentioned earlier, not necessarily gifted with all of this elite natural size, all the other stuff, but because you were able to think that way at a young age, I think is no doubt helping you now at this stage in the game. So that's really cool. Okay. So now all of a sudden you start this year, things are going pretty good, right? I mean, you guys, how many games had you all played up until June when you were, or how many appearances, I should say, had you had around that time?
I think I'd thrown 11 innings. I think we had played 35 games.
Yeah.
I'm guessing we were probably like 28-7 or something at that point.
Yeah, because
so
you guys
everything
were
was
rolling.
going well.
Yeah, everything's going well. Then June 3rd, right? Date that I'm sure you'll remember for a long time. You're throwing, come in, middle of the inning or middle of the game, and have one of those. Every pitcher's worst nightmare probably is that ball coming right back up the middle. And you just don't. It's not no fault of your own. You just aren't able to react enough. I mean, at the end of the day, these guys are putting force a lot of bat speed that are going to some of these balls, and the ball, you didn't get a chance to react. I know you don't remember any of this, right? I mean, has any of that come back? But the ball, for the listeners, hits you in the side of the head and you're knocked out literally before you hit the ground. And just, I mean, anybody who's seen video, was there that night, whatever the case may be. I mean, to this day, if when I've watched that video, I still get the same response, like just of nervousness of like, what's going on. I even know the outcome at this point, but what do you remember? What's the first thing I should say that you remember about all of that?
Yeah. So my memories cut out pretty much June 3rd through like the 6th or 7th. I can recall things when I was in the hospital with my wife, my parents. As far as leading up to June 3rd, I believe it was a Thursday night game. I had thrown 2 days before, so I actually probably wasn't likely to pitch that night. I'd thrown 1 2/3. We were in a rain delay for probably 2 hours or so. We're supposed to have piggybackers that night. They didn't get very far. I knew we were probably going to need to use a lot of the pen. I remember walking through the dugout and I don't know, the 4th or 5th, and the pitching coach kind of saying, "Hey, like you're probably going to have to throw one tonight." And that's pretty much the last of what I can remember from that point.
Yeah, until June 6th, and that's when it all starts to kind of come back. When you wake up or kind of start to get some of that memory back on June 6th, and you start to be a little bit more understanding of aware, I should say, of what's going on. What's your thoughts? What's going through your head at that point?
Yeah. So when I wake up, obviously you wake up in a hospital room, you have no idea what's going on. Thankfully, my wife was actually to my left. My parents were sitting over to the right. I kind of looked up at her in confusion. I guess I had been responsive before this, but I don't remember any of that.
Yeah.
And so, she tells me what happened. And at that point, internally, I'm like, okay, well, I see my wife, I see my parents, I know who they are.
Right.
That's a good sign. I'm having conscious thought, so that's a good sign as well. Neurologist then came in a little bit later, explained to me what had happened, because they also had to do tests on me every couple of hours, just from the epidural hematoma, the seizure. I know at one point they were concerned about a stroke in the hospital. So I was getting frequent check-ins, but then finally the neurologist was able to kind of give me a rundown of what the surgery looked like, what happened, where we're at, what recovery might look like. And then, the only other thing that really scared me was the area that was affected of the brain was the speech and motor cortex.
Right.
So my speech was slow, but on the motor side, I could not feel the left side of my body for a while. So that was a little odd.
Right.
But again, I just kept kind of going back to, all right, well, I have conscious thought. I know who these people are. I can get out a couple words and let's build from there.
You think about, go ahead, Brandon. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so Tyler, at what point you kind of do a self-assessment? Like you said, you are where you are. At what point do you start thinking, okay, how do I get out of here? And how do I get back on the mound? And is that even something that you're immediately thinking about? Or, how does that even start to kind of come back to you as like, okay, here's something that I still want to pursue and do?
Yeah. I will say when I was hearing the neurologist, and with me having the medical PT background, he explained the fracture. He explained how many screws and plates needed to be put in. And like that was fine. There's been a few guys who have been hit across the years. Actually, a guy I just saw here at Tread this week, Daniel Ponce de Leon, is a guy who had a small fracture. My fracture is a little bit different in terms of how it kind of radiated, but when he started talking about the epidural hematoma, and of course that being an artery clip that's going to the brain, issues of bleeding on the brain, tissue damage, whatever that looks like. When I knew that was in the picture, my thought was all about cognitive function. I definitely didn't think about the mound there and that kind of, I don't know what timeline that would be, but those thoughts weren't coming to me yet. I knew that the cognitive thing could be something pretty serious. So that's definitely where all my focus went. Yeah.
Changes that perspective pretty quickly. I think about this, and I'm sure you have as well, as you've had some time now, and, a couple months after this. Talk about blessings, man. I mean, if you're going to get injured to the degree that you got injured, being near Duke University Medical Center is not too bad, right? I mean, that's I don't know. I forget who you all were playing that night, but if that's an away game, I mean, it's, you're not getting the same level of treatment. I don't care where it is. And that's no offense to whoever you were playing, but Duke's one of those places you would, if you're going to have a medical emergency, that it's a good place to be around.
Yeah, I've reflected on that a few times, because if this were to happen in Princeton in the Appalachian League, like, am I airlifted to Roanoke? That's right. I don't know how far that is via helicopter, but it's not close.
Yeah.
And the great thing was with my trainers, how responsive they were, the ambulance being close. I think the time from the incident to me being in a CT scan to being operated on by the neurologist was like 30, 45 minutes or something like that. So like you're talking about in a variety of cases there, like who even knows if I'm at the hospital at that point?
Yeah. Well, and you just said something, and Brandon and I talk to a lot of experts about this, is the idea that as players, one of the challenges, especially towards the end of players' careers, is that's their identity, right? It's like, this is who they are. They're for you, it would be, he's a major league, pitcher, and he's, that becomes your definition and your identity. I would imagine, and to your point about when you wake up, you're thinking about the cognitive stuff, but you're also thinking about Tyler Zombro as the person, right? And it's like the player thing becomes so secondary to you at that point.
Yeah, I think obviously you're familiar with me working outside of the game of baseball, but I think everybody will tell you that my mind is better than my body in terms of performance. And that's immediately what comes to mind is, am I going to get back to where I'm at function wise? I know that can carry me for the rest of my life in terms of what my wife and I do long term, how things evolve. If I have that cognitive function, I know we're going to be good in that regard. And like you're saying, I ultimately had been out of the game of baseball before by not being drafted. I know what that felt like. I can live with it. And again, putting that in perspective to just be functioning fully, have opportunities still in front of me, that was the only thing that mattered.
So Tyler, so there's another side of the coin. As you're getting better and recovering, you have the hitter who actually, hit the ball and hit you. He's probably going through a lot. I know as a player, I know that if I was on the other end of it, there's some devastation that goes along with that. Have you guys had an opportunity to kind of talk and how does that look? And is there comfort or grace that you provide to him? Like how does that actually kind of go about?
Yeah. One of my closer friends, JC Escara, who I played summer ball with in Stanton, actually was in Norfolk with that guy.
Wow. Okay.
Brett Cumberland and I haven't spoke about it, given him a wave. Honestly, for me, the kind of the mission ever since I got out of the hospital and started getting better, both for him, my teammates, my wife, one thing that I wanted to do was start filling in the blanks. I wanted to show them progress. I wanted to kind of set the tone of the recovery stage. So, early on, I didn't want people to see me for a while. It was a couple weeks. I just didn't care to let them see that. But other than that, with the therapies I was going through, the progress I could see, I would try to talk to guys a little bit more. When I started walking around, I did that. But ultimately, with our team psych guy who came around a ton, I told him, I'm like, if somebody reads skull fracture, epidural hematoma, brain bleeding, he's going to speech therapy, he's doing this, he's doing that. Like, you have no idea what I'm going to look like or how I'm going to be. So I didn't want that perception to kind of loom. So it was definitely a bit of a mission to get out there, show progress, get the guys feeling better about where it's at. Cause I know that for everything I was going through, other people were certainly struggling just as much, if not more.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I mean, because I have a window into this, I know that you have just an unbelievable support system around you. I mean, not only it's friends and family, it's the community in which you come from. It's, college community. It's the Rays and Bulls community. Talk to us a little bit about what that has been like for you, because I imagine you've had so many. I know the Rays put together a video tribute and stuff like that, or I should say a little get well message. Talk to us a little bit about those texts and phone calls and all the things that you've been able to experience. And I'd also be curious if any of those surprised you. Did you get any notes or texts from anyone that surprised you?
Yeah, there were a ton that surprised me. When I woke up, I think there was like 1,300 text messages. I will say kind of the evolution of the quality of text message I got was something interesting to see as, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. I didn't respond to them all for a very long time. But seeing, originally it's like that night, guys are like, hope you're all right. I hope you get back out there. And, it transitioned to then, a lot of people, like we're talking about separating the player identity and the person, you see the transition kind of trend towards caring about the person. How's he going to be long-term? Stuff on the field certainly becomes irrelevant at that point. So seeing a lot of that was something that I definitely took notice of, because at that point in time, people are caring about the individual. All playing stuff is out the window at that point.
So Tyler, what role does so one of the things that we talk about a lot on the podcast is some of the resources that are available now that coming up. You mentioned kind of the team psych guy and all that. From a mental perspective, what kind of role does that play? How soon do they start coming around, and how soon do you really start to kind of self-assess and go through some of the exercises? Because that, I would think at the time that probably happens, that's got to be a little bit taxing and exhausting, doesn't it? I mean, it's great that the resource is there and that you're able to take advantage of it, but by the same token, it's got to be somewhat taxing. So how does that whole mental side of it get introduced back into your rehab?
Yeah, while I was not in it mentally there, the team psych guy was there, our GM was there, other members of our front office. They all spoke with my family, my wife, the teammates, everybody involved. So that was going on the peripheral. I had no idea. When I get back home, the team site guy is there. And again, when my speech wasn't good, I would spit out a few words or a sentence, and then I would go back to sleep because I'm still heavily sedated. But I think I then start to, what really hit me probably 2 weeks or so after, is the effect it was having on other people. And I did frame that perspective of my own well-being, because as inflammation started to go down post-surgery, I was getting better day by day. I had a strong feeling I was going to come back fine being myself. I know everybody was worried about that early on, is what does this look like on the other side? So being able to see where other people were at and knowing kind of what they needed, I think my attention shifted towards, all right, I'm confident in myself to get back here in terms of cognitive function. How can I better relax those people around me? And showing signs of that was a lot of my motivation early on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because, you just celebrated 4 days ago, actually, I guess on the 3rd of October, your 1-year wedding anniversary. And for the listeners, not only have you at this stage in the game in June 3rd, this is somebody you've known all your life. I mean, you and Mariah have, kind of grown up around each other or whatever, but not only are you not even married a year yet, she's at the game that this all happens at. So, I'm sure you've learned so much about, just the strength. And you knew you made the right decision way before this happened. You didn't need June 3rd to teach you that, but talk to us a little bit about what you've learned about her.
Yeah, I think especially early on when I couldn't do anything when we came back home, and she's doing everything. When I go to the bathroom, she has to take care of me. She has to bathe me. Even when we were in the hospital, she would roll me into the shower room and bathe me. She was just over the top in terms of care. And I think, again, on that just side of everybody recovering from it, for her, that was a lot of my motivation. Something I've felt pretty strongly about is I've had a couple talks with the people that aired the video originally and the lack of modification to it and attempting to re-air it, and really understanding the effects that could have on other people is something I voiced to them repeatedly. Like if you watch the ESPN feature, you probably notice there's a conscious effort that is not included in those videos. That's not for my sake. I can't remember it if you gave me $1 million to do so. Right. But for them, that was something I was pretty passionate about. So again, trying to reshape the recovery process in a positive light. And I think with her recovery and doing so much behind the scenes early on, she allowed me to do that.
Are those resources Brandon talked about, have they been available to, like Mariah and some of your family as well? Because I know that's, and I'm sure, a lot of those folks were at the hospital and around you or whatever. So it was probably happened organically where they're just talking to, Mariah and some of your mom and, all of the folks that were there. Is that what happened?
Yeah, they've been great. It's continuous support. They always will check in. If it was something as simple as, figuring out some way that my parents could go back home for the weekend or something, because there for a while I did have to have 24/7 supervision. Mariah, of course, was, eyeing me like a hawk. Her being a nurse, she had that side in her already. So I could guarantee everybody that I was not going to get an infection on the scar. I was in safe hands. That thing was being cleaned multiple times a day. So I had very watchful eyes over me. And then a lot of that support staff really did well with helping them kind of relax, and blending that with seeing me start to recover, I think certainly helped a ton. But our front office was incredible with it. Eric Neander, the GM, we're talking weekly, bi-weekly, talking on the phone for an hour. Of course, with what I do outside of my playing career, we talked a ton about that. But just the overall support they gave was incredible to both myself, family, teammates. And it was really a good combination to take the rehab, recovery, and positive light and combine that with their own coping.
So there's not a lot of, this is probably more common than a lot of people think, but not near as common enough that you would have, a handbook, so to speak, of how you come back from this, right? Like, have you had an opportunity, or will you, I guess, seek out some of the individuals that have come back from similar incidents, and just maybe from a mental standpoint, what was, their logic or their thought process, the strategy to come back from something like this?
Yeah. So Ponce de Leon is a guy who came back in like 2 to 3 months. Danny Farquhar is actually one of the guys I talked to right off the bat. He's an ex-Ray. actually one of the guys I'm close with here at Tread was in high A with the White Sox. So he was his pitching coach. And he actually connected me with Rob Vito, who is the guy who's designed headgear for me.
Wow.
And so that set a lot of the stage early there with how things would transition. But I've talked to them some about the general process. Going into an off season, I'm able to treat it the same. I'm sure I'll have more questions as we kind of get ready to move forward here. But overall, Jeff Baker is another guy who I've talked with, a Northern Virginia guy who was hit in the face his rookie year in Colorado. He was a hitter though, but coming back from that, what it looks like from getting cleared standpoint has been good. And then on the cognitive side, I think Danny was probably the one who dealt with most of that. That's similar to mine. And so getting through that part of rehab, having support and motivation, certainly good.
What was it? I meant to ask you this earlier. What was it like? I know you had an opportunity to speak with the first responders and to meet them at a ball game. I mean, that had to be a special moment for you.
Yeah, I was definitely, overcome with emotion. Again, I can't remember it.
Right.
And, again, I try to think of how good I'm doing, how things have progressed. Of course, everybody is, still shooken up from it. They have so many thoughts, but ultimately, all I can do is just be thankful that they were there, they responded. Ultimately, they're a part of this healing process too.
Yeah. And I think you're very wise to take it as that day-to-day approach. And I'm sure your medical professionals there at Duke are continuing to do that as well. As it's not, because I think that it's very easy for any athlete, any competitor to start getting into that. I've got to accomplish this. I got to accomplish that. And to be that goal focused, which is good, right? To some degree, that's what keeps people motivated to keep moving. But at the same time, though, I think it's really, really important that you just are like, okay, let's just go today plus today plus today plus today and just keep working on it. I love the idea that you introduced earlier from a mindset perspective of, this is about the windshield, right? The windshield's bigger than the rearview mirror for a reason. And even though this is something that has tremendous impact and will be something that will be a part of your life forever, right? I mean, this happened, but you're thinking of the future as the bigger picture here is very, very smart. I think it's the right mindset.
Yeah. Early on with the speech therapy and occupational therapy, I'll never forget my first occupational therapy session for the life of me. It was frustrating beyond belief. I wasn't happy coming out of it. My wife would tell you that I was pretty pissed off. Mm-hmm. But at that point, it's like I'm going in. Duke actually has a separate hospital. It's called Lennox Baker, where all TBI patients go. So you have, stroke, seizure, whatever it might be, variety of ages in there. People who have had brain tumors removed, young, old, everywhere in between. And it's an older building, kind of like a sad feel to it. And I went in, my first assignments were based upon like general motor skill, kind of like some pattern recognition, which thankfully I've worked with a neuro coach in the past. So I'm familiar with a lot of these different tasks. I was trying to use it for my performance at that point, but now it's a rehab thing. And she tells me like what are kind of the worst symptoms. I'm not even walking well at that point. Mariah's obviously walking with me, kind of keeping me in check so I don't fall over. We sit down, I'm doing like a grip strength test. I can't really squeeze it with my left arm because I can't feel it. She's asking me to like draw a line from 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, etc. Like I'm very slow in processing that. And at that point, like I'm just frustrated beyond belief. I'm like, this is awful. I'm in this environment. Of course, I'm thinking like, what's going to happen from here? I go home and I'm mad, but I'm like at the same time, I have to allow the inflammation to calm down. I can't expect to be coming out of a brain surgery just ready to go.
Right.
So like I took a nap that night, and then I woke up I told my mom, I was like, can you give me some Sudoku books? Because at that point I'm like, all right, I want to get this thing rolling a little bit. So I started solving a couple of those just to feel better. And ultimately the preceding days where the inflammation started to go down and I felt better. Then I started to become eager to get back in there to do different assignments to show the progress. But early on, it was definitely a point of defeat. But then I realized that the only way this is going to happen was through patience.
Yeah.
So Tyler, at any point, do you use your knowledge to kind of not say cheat, but give you an advantage? Like, oh, I know what they're getting ready to ask here, and kind of like work it through, like to kind of get the right answer, to make a little more progress than, maybe someone like myself that hasn't, I don't have any background in that. So I really don't know what they're trying to ask. Right. So do you kind of use that to your advantage?
Yeah, I knew that reaction time, impulse, general spatial awareness, and pattern recognition were going to be the quick ones. So I'm like, I actually, one of the first things I did was I sent an email to a company, Blaze Pods, that has like the reactive fitness lights.
Yeah.
So like I wanted to get those in because as I got cleared to do more, like I wanted to work on the reaction time. And then at my last OT appointment, like that was something I had to do in X amount of time to get cleared. So I had an idea
right there.
Yeah.
That tells you everything you need to know about Tyler. He knows what they're going to do. He puts in the work and then he crushes it. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I had an idea of what I was going to do. That's why I like the Sudoku books and other things I was trying to incorporate, but obviously not strain myself too much at that point in time. So thankfully I was able to work that in slowly.
So let me ask you, Tyler,
awesome.
And this may be an obvious answer, but I think the listener is going to have the same question I have, which is, why is it so important for you to come back in 2022?
Yeah, I've received a mixed bag of feedback on that. One of the things that early on hit me was we went to the neurologist appointment, our first one post-surgery. It's probably two weeks post-op it's when I actually had the staples removed. And Mariah is asking a ton of questions for me. I still wasn't talking too much. She's saying, do you think he'll play again? What's this look like? What's that look like? And at that point, I think Dr. Cook's kind of obliged to say, yeah, like I think he'll play again. But of course, there's of course the risk that he doesn't. We just kind of have to see how things progress. I knew that there would be a repeat CT scan in my future. And at that point, it's kind of out of my hands. I actually have that repeat scan December 1st back at Duke Hospital. So I'll have the CT scan, then I'll go see Dr. Cook after, and then he'll tell me yes or no. And receiving feedback from people, there was the population that was like, you have so much good going on in your life with your work in the private sector. I think everybody thinks I'm going to be a GM and in a front office in the future. And I could start to go down that avenue as well. So they're like, why not just go ahead and do that? And then on the other side of things, and this is kind of how I view it, is like, I'm playing with house money here. Like I don't have much to lose in this regard. If I'm cleared and everything's approved, why would I not get back out there? And I really don't want the last kind of game or impactful thought of my baseball career for Mariah, my parents, anybody who's supported me in my career thus far to be that game. So, I love it. If all is cleared and all else is equal, why would I not get back out there? So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
So what's success look like for you when you if I say, what's the goal? Is it to get back out there and just be able to compete at the level you were? Or are you like, what an amazing ending to this story to be, there in Tampa Bay sometime, walking out on the mound that way?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing as when I entered pro ball, of that perspective lens, is going out there. I've controlled the process thus far in terms of my cognitive rehab, my physical preparation. I go out there, do the things I can do to the best of my ability. And then, however it turns out is how it turns out.
Love that.
I definitely do not feel any external pressure of over exceeding, and I think that's also a powerful thing. Is there's nothing like, I wasn't drafted 1-1 and signed for an enormous amount of money. I don't have that over my head either. So again, I just approach it from the standpoint of, when I look at this thing holistically, I'm lucky to be where I'm at cognitively. I have so many things good in my life going on. So this playing picture is just a really small part of all of that.
Yeah.
If I can maximize it, I'm going to maximize it. And where that falls in terms of on the scale of where it gets to, then just so be it. That'll let itself kind of reveal.
Now, you mentioned the protective gear. Is that something that you've already heard from the physicians that have said, look, no matter how the CT scan comes out, you're not going out there with just the regular New Era issued hat, right? You're going to have a little something extra in it. Yeah.
So, I mean, I asked Dr. Cook all along. I was like, I'll go like John Ulrich with,
that's right. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
The Scully on there. It actually, the insert does look a lot like a Scully. It goes on the inside of the hat. It's carbon fiber with some padding underneath. I mean, he of course has said, like, I recommend you have headgear when you come back to playing. So my thought process is, if I have the headgear and seeing how the fracture is healing, if I'm as safe or more safe, then, all the reason to go do it. And so I think that'll provide, clarity for all parties involved, that I'm also having that protective layer in there.
Awesome. What are some of the things you're doing? Let's brag about Tread Athletics for a second. What are some of the things you're doing with them? I know that we were talking before we started recording that you've got a lot of really exciting stuff happening in this off season with them.
Yeah, we're a remote training company, largest in the world, over 1,000 athletes. Thankfully, when I came on last November, a lot of projects around data, TrackMan usage, both educating athletes on it, providing comps to them, to their agents, helping in free agency, whatever that might look like in terms of how data can further somebody's career. So that's heavy what my role is. I'm also a coach. I'm coaching, I guess, about 40 to 50 athletes. 30 to 40 are pros. I know 15 are big leaguers. So high level clients that we're working with, which is fun, a ton of problem solving. But Tread as a whole, 25 to 30 coaches, all coming from different backgrounds, all in the same room, bouncing ideas off of each other all the time, and really just maximizing an athlete's experience. So tons of educational growth stuff that goes on. And that certainly distracts me a ton from my playing career, as I always have that going on.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, Tyler, last question for you, and you've been so generous with your time, but I'm going to ask you this question because I have a feeling that this will be one of those questions you get quite often, actually, as you move forward to the rest of your life is, when you deal with something like this and you have to face that type of adversity and you have to start that comeback, story, any advice you have for other people that are kind of going through similar things, that are maybe at that, as Dave Meyer, our first guest ever on this show, who is a physical therapist as well, talks about it as time zero. It's that first day, where this is the low point, right? And everything is progress, or at least the hope is to move forward from there. But for those that are going through their own time zero, and it's not maybe getting hit with a batted ball, it might be something else, but any advice you'd have for them?
Yeah, I think it's the day by day growth. And I think taking small victories, no matter where they are. So, or early on when that inflammation's kind of crazy, I'm not doing much, I need to realize that sleeping is actually healing at that point. Right. And I think as I continue to progress, going day to day keeps your mind away from that long-term kind of lofty goal out there. I can't be thinking about pitching in the big leagues after an incident like that. It's just not realistic. And ultimately having some other external source of not motivation, but somebody or something you're doing it for is certainly better than doing it for myself. I think I'm just always more motivated when it is that way. Not trying to be selfish. If I'm trying to better my livelihood. I'm trying to better it for my wife, right? Like it's not always for myself. So I think having that approach of doing it for my teammates, my family, wife, growing that way for them, it's not about me getting to the big leagues. It's about making them feel more comfortable about where things are. And if I could do that incrementally better each and every day, then ultimately it's going to lead to somewhere. But I think that day by day thing is huge, because in the TBI hospital, you certainly see a lot of cases where that's not going well. And it's unfortunate, and it's honestly painful to see, is a lack of support, a lack of motivation. As you know, with brain tissue, it doesn't grow back. If you have permanent damage, you have permanent damage, and you have to reconfigure different neural pathways to make different things happen. And if you're not trying to do a little something each day to kind of trigger those pathways, it's hard to get back to full function. So being able to have that support, motivation to do something incrementally each day is ultimately what I would say.
That's awesome. Well, I tell you what, Tyler, like I told you in a text message, my money's on you, man. I just think that your mindset, your approach to things has always been a very positive one. You've always had a plan, like I said at the beginning of this thing, and you know what you're wanting to accomplish. You understand the importance of the commitment to the process, and like you said, take it day to day and just see whatever happens, because I think that playing with house money mentality is the right one, because I think if you look back and kind of reflect on your career, you've been playing with house money for a while now, right? Like, I mean, everything is that blessing. Everything's been that opportunity. So, I know we're pulling for you, and I have no doubt that you'll be, back on the hill in 2022. And add me to that list who thinks that you're going to be a great general manager one of these days.
Yeah. We'll see how all that transpires, but I'm hoping not to worry about it for a while. But sure. I think one of the interesting points you just brought up about general control and kind of just letting things unravel as they will is like Clayton Kershaw is a guy that I idolize personally. And one of the things that a quote that he had from a while back that stuck with me is, the more control you try to have over something, the more out of control it gets. And Absolutely. that's something that I've certainly taken in this whole thing in terms of recovery.
No, I think it's really, really spot on. Great last word to the show. Man, we're happy for your progress. Happy to see everything that's evolved since the incident. And, I think the great thing about this is one of our last guests that we had on talked about, everybody's life as a book. And that, each day is a new page, a new chapter. And the great thing is there's a lot of blank pages that are up ahead of you. And you're the one who kind of controls the narrative to that. You're the one who writes the story, because the pen ultimately is in your hands. And, right. We just wish you the best of luck, because I know it's going to be an outstanding story that you are going to continue to put to those blank pages you have.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to writing.
Awesome. Sounds good, Tyler. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Tyler.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.